So, Senator Vanderpute, other than funding, what do you think wasn't talked about in 2011, and what do you hope? I'll let you conjecture on this one. What would you hope would be talked about in 2013 that we didn't have it, that we need to address?
Well, I think one of the reasons, at least on the Senate side, and my perspective, I'll let John and Mike talk about on the House side. Senate's 31 members. We each represent over 800,000 folks. That's more people than a congressional district. So we all kind of know each other and work together. The reason really that school choice was not brought up is it was pretty much dead on arrival in the Senate, and that was bipartisan support for public education, because we felt we needed to fund our public schools first before we even examined anything else. So that's kind of why it wasn't brought up. But what wasn't talked about was hardworking teachers. What wasn't talked about was those teachers that spend hundreds of dollars out of their own money to get school supplies. What wasn't talked about was those that on their own time spend time on the campus or with students or doing extracurricular. What was talked about were things like, oh, you need to give them 6 non-instructional days of unpaid leave. What was talked about was, oh, you can reduce pay for staff, and oh, you don't need to go by the teacher, the salary contracts. That's what was talked about. What wasn't talked about was ways to help our teachers. And the dynamic was very different. When we did some school education bills in the past, we talked about a system where if there is a teacher and doing a great job and they need paper or they need whatever, we ought to have 10 volunteers running down the hall try to get them what they need so they can teach our kids. That wasn't the discussion this time. It was very anti-teacher because you had to blame somebody, and I'm sorry for those teachers that were here. I felt that my sister-in-law's a teacher, my brother 22 years middle school, my mom's retired choir director and administrator, and my sister's a saint. Who teaches 30 years kindergarten? She is a saint, right? Her steps to heaven. Those are the types. So you can understand if I don't get teacher stuff right, my Thanksgiving is miserable. But that's what we didn't talk about, was how to fortify. It was all defense and how to minimize the cuts. We didn't talk about what teachers and classrooms and administrators need to meet the standards that we want to set. We want to keep chasing the leaderboard. We want our students to keep improving. But the only answer was we need to back down because we can't fund it. No, we need to fund it so our kids can excel, and that wasn't on the table.
So Senator Vanderpute, your thoughts on the future of the STAR test and, of course, exams looking forward?
Well, I remember teams, talks, it keeps going because the instrument, the testing instrument, the experts tell us that it becomes outdated and not workable, within 4 or 5 years or whatever. And they have these great folks called psychometricians that figure out stuff. I call them psychomagicians because I don't understand anything. It's very, very difficult, but it's not the testing, it's where they put the cut score. So you can have a test that has 50 questions, and if your child passes 15, if the cut score is 15, then they're proficient. What is the perversion is the high stakes nature of the exam. It's the consequences. Because I'm going to tell you, our kids are smart. They're a lot smarter than you and what they're learning now is amazing. How they learn now with embedding technology is wonderful. The testing is not the problem. It's how we utilize the test for the accountability system. So I was really concerned, and I brought this up last legislative session. How are we going to implement the STAR? Because what we said was that the high stakes nature and the high school grades of the TOCs puts too much pressure. And it's like a pass or fail, that's it, you graduate or you don't. So the concept was to go back to the old end of course exams. Like when you took Algebra 1 and you finished a semester, you took a final. Okay, those of you that went to school with the slide rule know what I mean. But that's exactly what it was. So the concept, and we responded to parents and to teachers and everybody, is get rid of the high stakes nature of the talks, go back to the end of course exams. So we have these end of course exams that will begin with this freshman class. But it's how they've calculated, you have to pass so many end of course exams to graduate. And you have to have, the end of course exam has to count for 15% of the grade. And then it's this, and so it was a mess. We asked for clarity, we didn't get it. Commissioner Scott basically gave very broad guidelines to the school districts, and the school districts are saying, we need the guidelines because class ranking, scholarships, all this stuff goes into play with particularly our high school students. And so we need a continuum of how these are going to be applied, or else the students will be judged differently, not only from district to district. So our schools are not receiving the scores until early June, and I have real concerns because summer school, how you know who's going to be eligible for summer school, but that's okay, we defunded a lot of summer school, right? Maybe that's why they're not worried. So I was so excited yesterday. Commissioner Robert Scott stopped being the education commissioner and he started being a parent. You see, Commissioner Scott actually has now high school kids. Isn't that wonderful? How all of a sudden, if it's your kid, then you're really concerned. But I'm going to tell you, I think he knew all along. We are hoping that we are going to have some more discussions on that. I've got to tell you how great the Senate is, right? We haven't even had a hearing in the Education Committee. We haven't gotten our education charges. In other words, the Lieutenant Governor hasn't given the charges to the committee to study on education. And my education chair is retiring. Yeah. At a crisis time when we should be absolutely on this, we should be having hearings and stuff. And I applaud the House, because at least they delved into the subject. But right now, we're just trying to get some charges, get the work done, and I am glad. I think we may have turned the corner of it, but I know it's a long answer. I think it's how you use the testing when it stopped being a diagnostic and went to a high-stakes outcome. And it drove the system rather than the other way around. And we're just going to have to hear the outcry from parents to how we do this, and I really believe our districts need the clarity of it. And the number one, if you're not going to fund the student formulas, then you can't hold them accountable to the state's failure to do so. And it's got to be a promise. And this legislative session, the legislature broke its promise to our kids.